In this video, I will show you how to automatically create invoices in QuickBooks from SmartSuite with me. You can also replicate this workflow across many other platforms like Airtable and other databases as well. So make sure you check this out. Welcome to our channel. My name is Zach Stevenson. I'm a business processes and no-code consultant. If you need help streamlining or automating any of your business processes, please visit our website below to book a free consult. To get started here, I have already created my contacts table within my SmartSuite solution. I just added some sample data to get us going. I would imagine most people, if you are looking at automatically creating invoices, you probably already have some sort of CRM or sales solution, whether it's with SmartSuite or Airtable or elsewhere. So you already have a lot of this data that exists. If not, you can create one really simply to get started. So the important piece of information to have is things like contact name, contact email, phone number, add the company name, the address, billing email, and that type of information. What I'm going to be doing here is we aren't actually going to be creating the contact or the customer within QuickBooks. I will go into that in another video at a later time. So basically, the core piece of this video, I'm just going to show you how to create the actual invoice, assuming you already have the customers created within QuickBooks. But there is a couple of additional pieces of information that you need. One specifically, I will just open up the record, and what you will need is this QBO ID. So this is a customer ID that is specific to the customer within QuickBooks. And you can find that by going to your QuickBooks account and then opening up the customer. And in the top URL, there will be a number, and that is your QBO ID where you can just enter it here. Again, in a later video, I will show you how to create that automatically as well and import that QBO ID back into SmartSuite. Once you have your contacts table set up, we can go add a new table, and I will just label this invoices, and we can change the name of the record from record to invoice. There is a few changes that we have to make and a few additional fields as well. I'm going to get rid of the priority and the assigned to fields. We can add things such as the link to contact. So we'll just add a linked record and automatically picking up the contacts table. So I'll just click add field. The status, I want to make a couple changes here. We can leave it as backlog, in process. That's fine. I do want to add one here that's called draft and one that's called paid as well. You can change the colors if you want. And this is going to be the status of our invoices. So I'll update that field. At due date, we can leave as is. And I'm going to insert another date field type. And I will just call this invoice date. So we want the date the invoice is created or sent, and then also the due date of the invoice. Now, some people may have different terms or maybe the same terms all the time, whether it's net 14 days or 30 days or whatever it is. You could also add in a drop-down field type and create some sort of formula from the invoice date. So if November 1st was your invoice date and all invoices are due within 15 days, you could create a formula for that too. So you don't have to manually add the due date, but I'm just going to leave it kind of as is for the time being and add the invoice and due date manually. Different businesses will have different invoice structures, but ultimately it will be the same. Some businesses may have one line item across the board, depending on if they're just a service or a single product type business. And you could have different things like quantity, your rate, or your unit price, and then your total amount. What I'm going to get into here is just a single line item invoice, and we're going to add quantity, we're going to add rate, and we'll add the total amount along with the service or the product description. So I can get started by adding a number field, change the name to quantity, and we can add a currency field, and this can be called rate. And then we will add formula field, and this will be labeled amount. And all we are going to do is take the quantity, multiply it by the rate, and that will give us the amount. And the last thing we're going to add is a text area, and I'm just going to call this service. And there's a few additional pieces of information I need to add. The one thing is already created. It is the auto number, and I'm just simply going to use the auto number as the invoice number. So you can change that to fit your invoice structure, but I'm just going to leave it to start at 1 for the time being. I'm also going to add things like another formula field, and we're going to the advanced editor, and this is going to be my record ID. And I'm just going to bring that in with the function record ID. And once we create a record, you will see that populate in that field. And we will need that for the make.com scenario. A couple other pieces that we need is we're going to link to this contacts table up here. I have one sample contact in there, and we want to bring in that QBO customer ID. And we also want to bring in the billing email address as I have it entered in here. I'm going to add a blank text field, and this is going to be called QBO invoice ID, so that once we automatically create the invoice within QuickBooks, we can pass the ID back here so that we can easily find invoice in QuickBooks from SmartSuite. That's just going to be a blank text field. There's going to be 2 other fields that we do add here shortly. I'm going to add a test record. I want to change the title here to invoice ID, and you have lots of different flexibility with this, but I'm just going to bring in company name, or the contact name rather, and the auto number, so that when I add this and I link to the contact, it has created the invoice ID based off of the contact and the auto number. So now that we have that entered, I can go across, and I'm going to now reference using a formula field. I will reference the contact. So the link to contact using dot notation, I will bring in the billing address or email. And it's telling me that this could be a potential array. So I'm going to use the array unique function and just call this billing email. I'll add that field, and I want to bring in the contact again and the customer ID, or the QBO ID. I'll just call this QBO customer ID. And again, I will route this in the array unique function. And you can see it brings in 58 and the billing email address. Obviously there's no QBO invoice or QuickBooks invoice ID yet. We have the record ID that it's auto-populated. I can add some sample data here, a quantity, and a rate. You'll see the calculation occur here for the amount. We can add the invoice date. So I'll just select today, and I will select the end of the month for the due date. And we have most of the data that we need to create invoice. What we're going to do is navigate into Make. If you don't have an account, go ahead and create one. You can get started for free, and I will show you how to build the scenario within Make to create your invoice. We'll create a new scenario, look up a webhook to get started. We'll create a custom webhook. We'll create a new webhook, and you label this whatever you want. I'm just going to call it demo, create invoice, and we'll select save, copy the address to the clipboard, and hit OK. We'll go back into SmartSuite, and I am going to add a new field. It's going to be a button field type. We rename the field to create invoice, and the label can be create invoice. And I will go down to URL formula, edit the formula, and then simply use a concat function, paste the webhook. I'm going to add a question mark, REC for record, and an equal symbol. And then I'm going to bring in the record ID, and you can either use the field that you created or just the function. I'm just going to use the function, and I will click apply. And you can see when I hit add field, it has now enabled the button. So what's going to happen when we click that button is it's going to essentially call this webhook. It's going to create a variable labeled REC, and the variable is going to have the record ID value associated in it. So when it calls make and it activates that scenario, this is the record ID that we're starting. To navigate back into make, I'm just going to rename this to Create Invoice Demo. The first thing, once we run this and we select that button, as I mentioned, it will pass the record ID to this module. And so the next thing that we want to do is then go back and look up that record ID in SmartSuite. So we're going to add a SmartSuite module, and we'll use the get a record. So you'll want to make your connection if you have not done so already. Pretty straightforward. You'd click add, log into your SmartSuite account, and authenticate to the solution and workspace that you're looking for. So we'll select solution here. It's just called sales. And then the table that we want is going to be invoices. We're going to search by a field, and it's going to be record ID. And we'll have to test this in a minute. So I'll just add some test data for now. I'll just select one for the time being. I'll hit OK, and I'm going to right click on the webhook, run this module, and navigate back to SmartSuite, create invoice, and it has shown accepted. It's called the webhook, and it's passed in the record ID. So you can see that it has been accepted here. And if I select the little one icon, we can see that one bundle has been passed through with record ID. So I can copy this for the purposes of testing it within SmartSuite or within this SmartSuite module. I can select it. I'll back this out, and I will add this record variable that is now associated with the webhook module. I'll click OK. I'll save it, and I'm going to run this module only. So now it is looking for the record ID, and I copied it from the previous tested run, and I will paste in that record ID, and we'll test it to make sure it works. It's green, means that it has been accepted, and we can click into it to see the data it's found. It shows all the fields that exist within the invoices table within SmartSuite, and we can see all the data has been brought in. And now we can use that to create our invoice within QuickBooks. We're going to add another module. We're going to look up QuickBooks. I will use create an invoice module. And again, you will have to go in and add a connection. You'll have to authenticate and connect the two accounts, being make.com and QuickBooks. So if you have a QuickBooks account, you can do that pretty easily. You'll click add, it will open up an interface. Go ahead, log into QuickBooks, and the connection will be made for you. Once that's been done, now we can add the customer. And if you select the drop down, you can see all your customers there. However, what we have done back in SmartSuite is we have used the customer ID and brought that in. So we can use this map toggle here, select, and then go down to QBO customer ID. And we're just mapping that value from SmartSuite that has been found to the customer drop down here. So now when the invoice gets created, it gets assigned to that customer that you already have created within QuickBooks. As I said, I'm only creating a single line item within this invoice. So I'll just click item. Once it finds the required fields, I will start mapping the data. So amount, I will pass in the amount that we created from the invoice table in SmartSuite. And you can see the values here. So I've passed in amount. The description, this is going to be the service or product description. It's how I labeled it. The quantity is going to be quantity, and the unit price in this case is actually going to be my rate. I can leave the rest of this blank. There's a lot of different values that can be passed into QuickBooks. I'm keeping this really simple, but depending on your use case, obviously you'll have to add and subtract information as required. Throughout May, there's this online help, and you can also access the QuickBooks API documentation as well to help you pass information that you need. From here, what I'm also going to do is add a service date, and this is just going to be my invoice date that we created. I'm going to click this Show Advanced Settings, and I will scroll down from here. I'm going to pass in the billing email, and the doc number is your invoice number in QuickBooks. What I have done is just use the auto number in this case. As mentioned, if you change the name of that auto number to invoice number, it would show up there as invoice. But I'm just going to use the auto number, and I will just scroll down, double check. I think that's everything that I am going to look after. Like I said, a lot of different fields here to set up, but I think that is good enough for this tutorial. So I'll select OK, and I will move on to the last couple modules. The first one being is I want to now update SmartSuite. I'll update a record, and the record that's going to be updated is within that sales solution and also within the invoices table or application. And we need to map the record ID, and that is simply going to come from the SmartSuite get a record and use the ID there so that it goes and finds the record that we created the invoice from. It's now found that record, and the only thing I am going to update is the status. So I'm going to change that to draft, because we're essentially creating a draft invoice in QuickBooks. And the last thing I want to do is the QBO invoice ID, and we can go in here and select invoice ID. Select OK, and we'll take it one step further. We're going to use a webhook response, and we want to change this code to 307. We'll show the advanced settings, and we're going to add a couple custom headers. So the first one being location, and the second one is going to be the URL that it redirects to. So it's really simple. That is just your QuickBooks invoice URL, and then we're just going to append the QuickBooks invoice ID to it. This URL here, and we're going to append the invoice ID. And I'll select OK, so that when this scenario fires, it will go through. It's going to accept that record ID from SmartSuite. It's going to look up that record ID and get all the data associated to it. I'm going to create the invoice. It's going to update that record again. Simply going to change the status here to draft, and it's going to add the invoice ID from QuickBooks here, and then it will open up invoice that we just created in QuickBooks. I'm going to save this, and I will go one step further here and create another button. And this will just be simply open invoice, and call this open invoice. Use a URL formula. And I'm going to create an if statement to get started. And if the invoice QBO invoice ID is equal to basically blank, then blank. But otherwise, so basically if something exists within that field, then we're going to concatenate. We're going to use that function inside quotes, paste that URL that we just used within Make. And we're going to append the QBO invoice ID to the end of it and click apply, and we'll add field. So you can see it's grayed out here, and that's because the if statement is returning true because there is no QBO invoice ID currently. Go back into Make. I'm going to run this scenario, and we're going to give this a shot to make sure everything's working properly. So I will click Create Invoice. We'll just wait here, and if everything works correctly, it should open up the invoice within QuickBooks. I'll just select Make for a moment here, and you can see everything has went through properly, and each module accepted the data we passed to it. I'll go back into SmartSuite quickly, and you can see here now the Open Invoice button is valid and clickable. So if I click that, it will open up the invoice that we have here, and it's changed the status to draft. I'll just quickly scroll across and show you that it has also added the QuickBooks Invoice ID, which can be found also here. What it's done is it's found the customer that exists based off of this ID. It's added the customer email, the billing information, as I already had it added within QuickBooks. And then these two dates come from SmartSuite. We have the product and service, we have the description, we have the quantity, the rate, and the total amount. There's additional things like discounts, taxes, and all that type of information as well. But again, everyone's going to have a little bit different scenario depending on where they're located, what services or products they offer. So those could vary, but this gets you the core information as we need it. That's it for this video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it, and hit that subscribe button so you get more tutorials in the future.